The Secrets of Middle-earth is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we discuss the hidden themes and deeper layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether in his writings or in any of the media derived from them. I'm Jeff Haecker, and it is a gift to be joined by Thomas Salerno. Hi, Thomas.
Hey there, Jeff.
And welcoming Alix Murray. Hey, Alix.
Hello.
And be sure to follow The Secrets of Middle-earth in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast directory or app. And you can find us on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or on Twitter or X, where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And don't forget that you can get your own official Secrets of Middle-earth merch, including our awesome t-shirt at sqpn.com/merch. And it has the Hail Mary in Tingwar and features the 5 hero races featured in The Fellowship of the Ring, which is apropos because today we are discussing the film Fellowship of the Ring, directed by Peter Jackson, and it is currently streaming on Max and many other platforms. So before we start, I thought I'd just give a brief description to remind everyone. I'm sure we've all seen it many times at this point. So the wizard Gandalf calls Frodo Baggins, the nephew of Bilbo from The Hobbit, to bring the One Ring out of the Shire to keep the servants of Sauron from returning it to their master. At the Council of Elrond in Rivendell, Frodo accepts the burden of carrying the ring to Mordor to destroy it. Representatives of the free peoples of Middle-earth join this fellowship. However, Gandalf is lost along the way in the mines of Moria. Aragorn leads the remaining fellowship, which breaks apart when Boromir dies from an Uruk-hai attack, and Frodo decides to carry the ring alone, but not before Sam joins him. And Merry and Pippin distract the Uruk-hai so that Frodo can get away safely, but are taken, and Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas go after them. So I thought I'd just open it up, kind of to just get your experience of the film. Did you read the books first, or do you remember your first experience of the films? And Alix, I'll ask you first as our new panelist here.
Okay. That's very kind. Thank you very much. Those are good questions. I was thinking about it. And of course, I rewatched the film yesterday, which was September 29th. And do either one of you know what happened on the 29th of September by the Shire Reckoning?
Oh, it's a week after the birthday party, after Bilbo's birthday. I don't
I think you've stumped me. Wow.
So yesterday is when Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin met Strider at the Prancing Pony in Bree. And
Okay,
so when I was watching it last night, I was like, it's like I'm there. I'm just sitting in the pub with everybody else, and here come the hobbits. So I was really I love that kind of thing about Lord of the Rings. But to go back to your question, it's interesting. The Lord of the Rings has been such a part of my life. I couldn't tell you when it first appeared in my life. Do you know what I mean? In terms of reading it, I think I probably first, I don't even know when I first read it. I have memories of it as a child, but I think the first time I read it and I thought, this is not a child's book, was probably in my early 20s. And so that was, it's always been had such a profound presence in my life. And in terms of the film, if I could just share, not necessarily my experience with the film, but my husband's experience with the premiere of the film, or the preview. We were watching, this was obviously 20 some odd years ago. We were going to see something like, let's say, Shrek, and we're just in the theater. And my husband is a man of measured emotions, shall we say. So he's pretty, even keel on everything. And the previews were coming up on screen. And we hear the music that we now know. We all have that dun, da, 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 and of course, that probably sounded a little more like Star Trek. But anyway, but it's when they're coming over the mountain pass. I think this is when they decided to cross to Caradhras, and it's Gandalf and Strider and the hobbits. And my husband put his hands like over his eyes, and he started rocking back and forth, and he's like, they've done it. And I said, what? Who are they? What did they do? And then, of course, it started clicking in. This was Lord of the Rings. And we both were like, oh my gosh. And that was before the film even started. So that was kind of the beginning of everything. And it's just been, we watch it at least once a year. I've read it every year out loud to my children until they ask me to stop. So.
Oh wow, very cool.
Wow, nice.
You said the music, which that might be a whole separate podcast discussion of the music of the films, but yeah, it's so iconic. And
Howard Shore,
like all
knocked
parts
it
of it
out of the park.
Yeah, like the Shire, the parts in the Shire. Like anytime I see a picture of the Shire, that music kind of starts playing in my head. But very cool. Thomas, what about you? I know we've talked a little bit about this before, but I think you said you've read the books long before you read the books before the films, or was it kind of around
simultaneously?
The same time?
It actually have two amusing stories about when this movie came out. So I first became aware of it because, there were trailers on TV and in the movie theaters. And I want to say about 12 or 13. And I had just read in school the first Harry Potter book, which, unlike many people in my generation, I wasn't that impressed with it for whatever reason. I got no problem with it. It's just that it just didn't impress me. And I saw the trailers for this new movie, and I saw Gandalf, flowing robes, the hat, and I'm like, ugh, wizards again. And it was actually my mom, who, she didn't know a lot about the Lord of the Rings, but she had read a magazine article in some local Catholic periodical about Tolkien's deep faith and how he wove that into the Lord of the Rings. And she told me, like, no, you might like this. It's different from Harry Potter. It's a lot different. And that intrigued me. And so in the run up to the movie, I went out and I bought the books. I went to Borders, the bookstore, when it still existed here in the Northeast.
Oh, Borders is gone?
Borders is gone.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I've been away for a long time.
Yeah. So I bought paperback copies. I read those. They knocked me off my feet. And I actually didn't get to see the Fellowship movies during its theatrical run.
Oh, no.
And part of the reason was because my family went to see movies in the theater very rarely. It was kind of like a treat thing. And if the stars didn't align, we weren't going to the movies. So I managed, and this is the other amusing thing. I caught the first Fellowship movie after I had read all three books. I finally saw the movie when it came out on video. My local library had a screening of it.
Oh,
and
okay.
so it was in the basement of the library. They were showing the Fellowship of the Ring, but it was me, my mom, and a bunch of almost entirely senior citizens watching, and they did not know what to make of this film. They had no context of it. They mostly kept laughing at all the orcs. And then when the movie ends, because they weren't aware this was a trilogy, and the movie ends and it doesn't really resolve a whole lot, and they're like, "What? Really? It's over?" And so so just picture that. It's, 13-year-old me, my mom, and then a bunch of 70 and 80-year-olds watching this fantasy movie in the basement of our local library.
A 3-hour fantasy movie.
A 3-hour fantasy movie. Yeah. And it was the theatrical cut. Yeah. So, yes, I will always remember that. Of course, I saw The Two Towers and The Return of I made sure I saw those in theaters.
Yeah.
But yeah, The Lord of the Rings, just after that, like I said, the books knocked my socks off. And I've reread them basically either reading them or through audiobook every year, pretty much ever since. It's my favorite fictional universe. And it just shaped so much of how I view the world. And and my own journey as a creative writer and things like that. So this movie, and we watched this movie a lot on video. And I have to thank my aunt, who sadly passed on a few years ago, for both taking me to see The Two Towers and Return of the King when it was in theater, and for buying me the extended editions on DVD. Because for me now, it's the extended edition or nothing.
Right.
So yeah, this movie, The Fellowship, is probably my favorite of the three movies, for reasons that I can't properly articulate. There's just something about it that speaks to me, and I'm not sure why. It just has like watching The Fellowship of the Ring to me feels like coming home. That's the only way I can describe it.
Do you think it might be because a lot of it is spent in the Shire?
I think so.
Yeah.
That might
very
be
cool.
it.
Yeah, and just for my brief thoughts is I was aware at least of Tolkien. I think my earliest Tolkien memory was hearing a drama teacher in like elementary school or something reading Gollum's riddle, or reading that scene out of The Hobbit, and so I was kind of vaguely aware of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings as a thing. I hadn't really read it though, and when the films were coming out, I said, okay, if I know a film is coming out of an adaptation, I usually like to try to read the adaptation, read the book first, and before I see the adaptation. Not always, but a lot of times. So I'm pretty sure I got the books right before, and I read before The Fellowship. And I've only read The Fellowship or the Lord of the Rings trilogy a couple times through. As I've said before on the podcast, I'm definitely more of like the film guy, of like, that's more of my entry, or, what I go back to. And I think now as an adult, I definitely want to get into reading them more often. I think I just read them last year again for the first time in a couple of years. But yeah, the films, absolutely love them. And yeah, my memory of seeing The Fellowship is my dad took me, and my dad is, not a fantasy type of guy. He's like, sports and cars and that kind of thing. And he grew up seeing Star Wars when it came out in theaters, not when growing up, but when he saw that in theaters. So he's like into, some of that stuff. But when we went to see the movie, and I knew it was 3 hours, and I said something to him about it, and he's like, this is 3 hours. Like, he had no idea what we were getting into. So shout out to my dad for taking me to that first one. I think the other ones, I think I was old enough to drive, or I was like my friends, because I was about, I think the first one came out maybe my freshman year or sophomore year of high school, and I started driving around junior, senior year. So I think by the time the later ones were coming out, we were able to like drive each other to see the movies. But yeah, no, I just absolutely love the films, and I probably watch those at least once a year as well. And yeah, for me, it's the extended editions now. I think I bought them on DVD when they came out, and they're now on, even the extended editions at least are on Max, so it's even easier to watch them. But yeah, so I just, now that we've kind of given our brief thoughts, I just wanted to kind of open it up. What, in your opinions, or your thoughts of, what does the film get right, or what do you like about it? Because I know there's things about it that were things in the books that were omitted, or there's changes that may have been made that aren't always the most popular among like diehard Tolkienians. So just kind of, what does it get right for you that you feel like it, that you enjoy versus, and I have another question to discuss kind of what we may not like as much, but I'll go to you, Thomas, first. What are your thoughts on, what do you like about it that's, or like that it gets right for you?
I think what it gets right for me is that the choice to film in New Zealand was inspired. That landscape is so majestic that to me, it's just Middle Earth. It feels like you're in another time. Middle Earth is supposed to be our Earth, but eons in the past. And it just, you just feel transported whenever you watch this movie. So I definitely love all the landscapes. I love that a lot of it was shot on location. I love the attention to detail in everything. The armor, the buildings, the clothing that everyone wears, the props. I liked, if you've watched any of the behind the scenes material, which in the extended editions they supply a lot, like hours and hours of behind the scenes footage. There's this part where Peter Jackson says that his philosophy going into this was basically to have the same level of attention to detail as if he were filming a historical epic.
Wow.
He wanted it to feel authentic. Like they had gone back in time to the third age of Middle Earth and filmed the real events happening on location. And I think he really nails that. The verisimilitude is so real. It's a lot like what George Lucas did with the original Star Wars trilogy. It feels real, like a real place, that you can just inhabit. And I think that combined with Howard Shore's amazing score and the terrific job done by so many of the actors, I think that's what it gets right. And of course, the tone of just, I think that even in the places where they deviated from Tolkien's writings, at least in this first film, for the most part, they kept the spirit of Tolkien's original material. And yeah, it's like especially with this first movie, it's hard for me to find things I don't like about it. It's easier to just talk about what I like.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely has, like, again, I've seen the films more than I've read the books, but yeah, it definitely has those vibes of, as I've gone back to read more, because I definitely didn't read the Silmarillion until years later, and I've read it again since then, and like you definitely get the vibes of in the films that Tolkien was writing about for the landscapes and the peoples and everything. So yeah, definitely. What about you, Alex?
Yeah, I think you got a lot right. I will say that. And, when I was rewatching it again yesterday, I just thought, as Gandalf was riding into Hobbiton, with his horse and trap. And I thought, the first thing I thought was, man, I've missed this place, and it is that attention to detail, and things weren't done. It's almost timeless. When you think about how old the movie is and how it doesn't feel old. And I think that's because when they did the costuming, obviously the hobbits were kind of, the way they put the costumes together, they were kind of like 18th century squires. And I mean, that's really what Bilbo, and that's who Bilbo was. He was like an 18th century squire out in the English countryside, specifically the Oxfordshire countryside. And so they didn't use modern contemporary colors or fabrics or anything. These were all things that you could take someone back into the 18th century and you'd find someone dressed like that with the same level of detail and quality of clothing. And it was the same thing. I watched the behind the scenes documentaries about how, they had potters from New Zealand and they had wood carvers and carpenters and artisans that they brought in to make the scenery. And it really shows, when Frodo was in Rivendell, if you just take a glance at the table with the pitcher of water on the table is beautifully carved. The pitcher is a lovely, probably salt glazed pitcher. And one of the things I was thinking about in terms of the detail, because I think that is why it has maintained its popularity, I guess, and people still love it. You can still watch this film and you don't feel like you're watching something that's 22 years old. You feel like it was made yesterday. It's timeless. And, just looking at Boromir's outfit, when he comes into Rivendell, oh my gosh, I just thought the details, this looks like a man who's coming from a well-cultured, established place where they've worked out their philosophy of life, and they have their traditions, and it is a high culture. He's coming from a high culture, and everything about his outfit speaks to that. along with him being a warrior. You know, it's not just a bunch of stuff. It's not like Conan the Barbarian. You remember, I don't know. You're probably too young to remember when Arnold Schwarzenegger was doing
I'm a
Conan
fan of the
Barbarian.
original Conan stories. So,
okay.
yeah.
So, but you know,
I get
like,
what you're saying.
But when they did the films, it's like, what is that? What is that fake fur? What is that nasty thing he's got on? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Or the knights in armor, the chainmail was literally, it looked like a sweater that somebody had just spray painted silver. You know?
Yeah, it's not good. Yeah.
Whereas the chainmail in Lord of the Ring, in Fellowship of the Rings, I mean, it's amazing, the details, and it's that kind of. I mean, if you really look at Boromir's, you know, the shirt that he's wearing has, you know, it's beaded with metal beading, and it's just stunning. It's like looking at a piece of art. Well,
and like every prop from this movie is a work of art.
It is.
Which is
it absolutely
astounding.
is.
Yeah.
And even, you know, from the beginning, of course, I was thinking this not in a way to make myself feel better about my tiled floors. But when you go into Bag End, you know, when Frodo picks up the ring that Bilbo dropped, and you can see the tiles are cracked and there's like dirt and stuff filled in with, you know, and if you have a floor that's like 300 years old, a 300-year-old tiled floor, that's what it looks like.
Oh, wow.
Whether you want it to look like that or not.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed that detail. Yeah, no, I mean, for me, I just, like I said, I don't know if I would say the film is my favorite. It's hard for me to rank because I think I probably like Return of the King best just because of the, you know, I like the big culmination as kind of my favorite, but yeah, no, but it's hard to rank them, but I do really like it. And yeah, like you were saying, when you compare this to something like Star Wars Episode 1, while there were a lot of miniatures and things used, you can definitely, that film has the CG type stuff has not aged well. Whereas the CG and was mixed with practical enough so that it really, like, there might be a couple shots that look a little dated, but I mean, otherwise it doesn't look, you know, it doesn't look like it was 22 years ago. It looks like this could be something coming out now. And a lot of that is due to the practical nature, which unfortunately they went away from in the Hobbit films, which I know Thomas and I, eventually we'll have to do those, but we're not in a huge rush.
We like to joke about the Hobbit movies on the show.
Well, maybe I could joke with you. Yeah. But at that point with that, I just thought, you know what? I'm willing to spend as much time in Middle Earth, no matter where I am. I'll just kind of take it. Take it as I can get it.
And you mentioned Boromir's costume, which I do have something to say about that in a little one later, because there's a detail I recently read about that I thought was really cool, but I'll save it to kind of a section where we're getting into that. But and just the intro of the film, which I again, y'all have read Fellowship more than I have, but just getting Galadriel's intro and seeing the Last Alliance, and like that whole scene was great. Because if someone's never read Lord of the Rings and isn't really familiar with Tolkien, you're not going to really get, if you didn't have that, it would be like, well, who is Sauron? Why is this? What is the ring? Why is this a big deal? So I love that intro, and seeing, which to kind of connect it to Rings of Power, like my speculation is the final season of Rings of Power will be the Last Alliance, and seeing this play out, and obviously it'll be different actors, but that's kind of my hope, is to see that played out in live action one day. And then I know this isn't a scene in the book in the Two Towers, but I love how they connect the Last Alliance here to in the Two Towers when the elves come to Helm's Deep. And I know that's not in the book, but I love that scene in Helm's Deep.
Yeah.
When they come.
Well, and that scene, it's kind of like, it's more heartbreaking when you read the book, because when the elves didn't come, Legolas was devastated.
Yeah.
You know? And so when you see like, oh, this is what Legolas wanted to happen. And then you read it again and you're like, oh my gosh, this is such a tragedy. So it kind of, in some ways, enhances, both are enhanced. It's interesting. The book and the film are enhanced in two different ways. from that scene, but that's another film we'll talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and just other connections with like, because I wish I had rewatched the Rings of Power season 1 before I just didn't have the chance, but seeing like the connections that are there, like we're seeing a young Elrond, we're seeing the Mines of Moria, Galadriel, and like remembering what, and I kind of think of and I think everybody, this is a pretty common thought that the Rings of Power is kind of like the Jackson, it's like the Jackson verse of Lord of the Rings, where they're more kind of based off the films and in a lot of ways than the actual writings. But yeah, just seeing like all the, even aesthetically, like the Rings of Power is drawn so much from these films. And yeah, and
sometimes I wish they didn't. Yeah, like one thing that this film, The Fellowship of the Ring, has done, and it's not the film's fault. It's people later that now Balrogs have to look like the one in this movie.
Exactly.
And they never look any different, even though the description in the book is pretty vague and gives a lot of leeway for you to play with some interesting creature designs for the Balrog. Nope, they just have to look like a giant demon thing with the ram's horns and the wings and stuff. And now that's everyone's mental image of a Balrog, because it was the first time anyone had seen one.
Exactly.
When you've seen this movie, and the one in Rings of Power looks identical. And I'm like, come on, guys, you couldn't have made it look a little bit different.
Well, because they were all, Balrogs and the wizards, they're all the same
order,
species or order. In the Second Age. And you think, well, there was a lot of difference between the wizards. There could have been as much variety with the Balrogs.
Well, to be fair to Rings of Power, in that it's the same Balrog, so it should look
and they want to visually connect so that people know, this is the same creature. That's true. I hadn't considered that.
Yeah.
But just seeing, like, it's cool having seen the Rings of Power and seeing the Mines of Moria, like when they're populated, and it's kind of the height of their civilization, and then seeing just the fall, how it's fallen into ruin in the film, or in the books in the film. But so I know there's a lot of changes in the film that and again, I love the film. So what do y'all think of some of these changes? Like, one of the big ones is Aragorn's story, because in the books he's not a reluctant hero. Like, he gets to Rivendell and he gets the sword. He's carrying the hilt with him the whole time, and then when he gets there, it's like he knows the whole time he's gonna be king, and he's gonna marry Arwen. Like, he knows that the whole time in the book, but in the film, it's like he hasn't. He's avoided that his whole life, because he doesn't. He's feeling he's weak because of Isildur.
Isildur, yeah.
So that's one of the big changes, but I tend to like it in the films as an adaptation, because if you started out Aragorn as like the big hero, then it's not as interesting to me. Where in the film, it's like, well, then your main drama is the quest is Frodo getting to Mordor, and there's other drama too, but this is like the other main component of the film story. So I like that change, but I don't know what y'all think of that, or if there's any changes you liked or you didn't like. I know we did a whole episode on Tom Bombadil. He's notoriously missing for here, but
if Thomas Sanjurjo was here, he would talk about how that's his big thing, that they removed Tom Bombadil.
Yeah, but how do you put Tom Bombadil is so weird.
I know.
It's like, how do you get him to make sense? And especially for people who aren't familiar with the books, I just can't imagine. They would be like, what? Who is this guy? What is going on?
Even when I first read the books, I was like, Tom, it was just such a weird section of that for me.
Yeah.
And they later
Bombadil.
Yeah. And they later did give some of his story elements to Treebeard in the Two Towers, but
they tried to he was a very difficult character to try to incorporate into anything. Even if you think about the Council of Elrond, they didn't even know what to do with Tom Bombadil.
Oh yeah, they were like, should we have invited him? And he's like, he wouldn't have even showed up anyway. He'd just be like,
exactly.
Remember, Tom Bombadil believes what he is doing is extremely important. Like he tells the hobbits, because they're like, can't you at least come to Bree with us? And he's like, no, I've got things to do, my singing and my talking and my walking. And that is to him, that is extremely important. You can't mess with his schedule.
Yeah, and it's probably extremely important to Middle Earth.
I know, right? Yeah. In some mysterious way, him running around his little area and singing and living with Goldberry is somehow super uniquely important to like the whole universe functioning or something.
Well, it's kind of like the Mass, isn't it? You know, that's how we see, you know, people don't realize how important the Mass is.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thought. Cause like, it's this to anyone on the outside, it's this seemingly like it doesn't appear to quote unquote do anything.
Exactly.
But when you're in the know, you know, it's of like supreme importance.
Exactly.
But, and there is speculation he'll be in Rings of Power, but we'll see if that does happen. But yeah,
in terms of Aragorn, though.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. I like both interpretations for their own reasons. I feel like in the film, it was probably the right choice because you need the audience to really care about Aragorn and his journey. And it's a common film trope to have somebody who's going to have a lot of power like Aragorn only come into that power kind of reluctantly, you know, especially in this kind of postmodern world where anything with power is like verboten anyway, you know, that all power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So like to a modern audience, I think it made sense almost to kind of, but he quickly fills in like the hero role that he's in the book. I mean, especially by Return of the King, he's in full hero king Aragorn mode. I don't know if I liked the delaying him getting the sword. That's the one thing I didn't really.
I think you're right, Thomas, in terms of a postmodern audience not understanding a hero who knows he's the hero from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, I think and this is where Tolkien's drawing on, I think Aragorn is, with the character of Aragorn, Tolkien is drawing on his knowledge of Norse sagas and things like Beowulf. You know, Beowulf from a modern perspective sounds like an arrogant jerk. But but in that time, if you could come and say, I can do this, that's what people wanted to hear. People didn't want to hear about your self-doubts and your reluctancy, because, you know, they had to survive and they needed someone to come and like, if you don't think you can kill this monster, then you need to get out of the way so we can find someone who can kill this monster, you know, and Aragorn was kind of like that in the book, which was very appropriate because it is quite like a saga. But I think for maybe a film, he would have come across, I think Boromir kind of fills that role. He's very confident. He's very, we would say today he's full of himself, and we see it as a flaw. And he was a flawed character, whereas Aragorn wasn't. And I think his reluctancy we would interpret today as humility, natural humility. So he's okay. He can have this power because he doesn't want this power. And he wasn't tempted really by the ring because he didn't want that power. But I wanted him to be like the Aragorn in the book, if I'm going to be honest. I like him a lot more than the film version of Aragorn, although I think he stepped into the role at the end of the film. Yeah. He said, we will not leave them to torture and let's go get them.
And even in the book, when that whole time they're going down the Anduin, Aragorn is plagued by self-doubt. He doesn't know what to do because Gandalf's gone at this point, and he's like, so do I have to take Gandalf's role? Do I have to escort? Is it my duty to escort Frodo all the way? Or is it my duty to go to Minas Tirith? And he's conflicted.
Yeah.
And yet by the end, like he says, the fate of the ring bearer is in my hands no longer. And he realizes what his duty is just like in the film, to go after and rescue Merry and Pippin.
Yeah.
But even in the books, like he can be conflicted, but not about his identity.
No, in the part when Frodo and Sam leave, and when they find out that after they've buried Boromir and they've sung their songs to him, in the book, there is a point where he's like, I don't know what to do.
Yes, yeah.
And then he does make that decision.
But I think in movie Aragorn is a little bit too conflicted about his identity, whereas book Aragorn is just like, I'm the heir of Elendil, and not, like you said, not in a way where he's not lording it over people or anything like that. He's like, it's just my identity. That's who I am, who I was born to be. I actually do like and I don't think it's from this film, and I can't remember whether it's from Two Towers or Return of the King. I do love the line when Elrond says, put aside the ranger, become who you were born to be. Because I just love that. I think that's a very...
it's Return of the King.
It's Return of the King, okay.
That's when Rohan is... the Rohirrim is marching to aid Gondor. And Elrond brings him the sword.
Right. But like even the other characters in the movie are like, get with it, man. You are the king. This is who you were born to be. Stop acting like you're not. Yeah,
and in the films, Elrond is worried about losing his daughter to a mortal life if she marries Aragorn. So whereas in the books it was always like Elrond's like, if you're going to be worthy of her, then you like no less than the king of Gondor can marry my daughter.
And see, and that's very much, that is hearkening back to the sagas and things like that kind of language, which sadly doesn't translate as much as it should.
Yeah. And speaking of Arwen, one change I think that does work for me is having her take the role of, I believe it's Glorfindel in the book, who meets Aragorn and the hobbits along the way to Rivendell and brings Frodo to Elrond. I like that it's Arwen here because it gives you that, because if in the books it's like you don't really get much of Arwen. It's like you get a lot more in the whatever is at the end. The appendices, I couldn't think of the word. But in the book you don't get a whole lot of their relationship, whereas here like you get from the beginning, like when Arwen sneaks up on Aragorn, she's like, what's this, a ranger being caught off his guard? And you kind of establish that from the beginning, and then when you get to Rivendell, you I believe you flash back to, or no, you don't flash back to when they first met. I think you flash back to when Aragorn is leaving Rivendell in the past to go kind of ranger, when he's like leaving the fostering of Elrond. If I could be wrong on that. And then
in the movie, they also talk about when they first met.
Maybe that's what it is. Yeah. And she gives him the Evenstar jewel, which is like her, because she's Arwen Evenstar. It's kind of her like elf nickname. So I like that they kind of established that here, so that by the end of it, because in Two Towers you don't get much of it. Like he has, I think in the Two Towers film, Aragorn has a dream of Arwen when the warg like carries him off the cliff, or the warg carries him off the cliff.
Silly death fake out that they had to do for Aragorn to up the drama.
Yeah, but I think you get that there. Cliff. And then in Return of the King, you get Arwen deciding to leave Middle Earth with Elrond, and then she has a vision of having children, and she confronts her father about it, and then she, he brings Elrond brings Aragorn the sword, and then at the end they marry. But I think if you didn't have that setup scene, people would be, especially new viewers, would be like, who is Arwen? Why do we care? So I like that you give her that little bit of action where she's carrying Frodo and all. But I don't know if you guys prefer the original version in the books, or what y'all
I
think.
have to say, if I'm gonna be honest, I really did not like that they replaced Glorfindel with Arwen. Although I will have to say something positive about what happened, like my little theory about it. But I loved Glorfindel, and I always had this idea of him, especially, when they talk about when he got to the other side of the riverbank and he was like, come at me, bro, to all of the riders. And it says that Frodo looked at him and it was this elven lord in all his glory. And he was like shining and just and the writers were terrified of him. Whereas Arwen was like, I'm going to run with the horse. And I mean, it was a really exciting scene. It was good, but I just was like, oh, whatever. I don't know. Glorfindel, I think, because not just in Lord of the Rings, but in the Silmarillion, Glorfindel is an amazing character. And he was just like this guy sitting next to Elrond at the council. And I was really disappointed at that. Having said that, I do like all of the female characters in Tolkien, the way they're written and actually the way they were portrayed in the films. I think they've all been done incredibly well. They were a little bit different, but I think they both were equally good. With Arwen having taken the place of Glorfindel, I do think that scene, and you tell me what you think, when she finally gets Frodo over to the other side and he's clearly moving into the shadow world. And she said, she picks him up and she said, what grace has been given to me, give to him.
Yeah.
And I thought, is that when she decided that she was going to give up her immortality? Like she gave him.
Yeah. I think it was a step in that direction because like I said, in Return of the King, she says she's going to go to the shores she's going to leave Middle Earth on the ship and go back to Valinor. So I think it was definitely like she was a step in that direction, which is for having just met her and she's giving up her, like giving her potentially, her immortality to,
like her life force or something.
To someone she's never even talked to, like, cause Frodo was already stabbed at that point when she comes in. So, and I don't know if maybe it's her love of Aragorn. Like she's like, if I give up my immortality, that means I can marry this mortal or something like that.
I kind of interpret it as, I thought it was obviously it was a profoundly selfless act. Mm-hmm. But I think she also understood the seriousness of the situation. It was so serious that she was willing to give whatever grace was given to her, she wanted to give to Frodo. And then I also think, is that part of what enabled him to, in the films, not the book, but in the films is, we can imagine that grace that was given to him by Arwen is something that helped carry him through all the way to the end.
There is a book connection here, though, because in the Return of the King book, Arwen says to Frodo that basically, I'm giving you the grace of my spot on the ship. That gift that would have had to go to Valinor, I now give to you, a mortal who wouldn't normally have that grace. Yeah. You're being given this gift to go to Valinor and live out the end of your days there in a place where your spiritual wounds from the Morgul knife and stuff won't bother you. So there definitely is that connection. Yeah, but I hadn't thought of it in terms of like part of that grace he's receiving is kind of what helps him make it to the end. That's an interesting thought. I like that. And in terms of like, it definitely sounds Tolkienian, even if it's not, if that's not in the books, that sounds something very much in the spirit.
Yeah, it's the vibe of.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's like I said, if I hadn't read the book, I would be a lot more okay with her taking Glorfindel's place. And maybe if I hadn't read the Silmarillion, but since Glorfindel is one of my favorite characters ever.
He's almost like a Tom Bombadil type because he's so OP. And in the book, like they even mention that like he's so OP, they don't even put him in the Fellowship. Because they're like, it would give it away what they're up to if you put somebody as powerful as Glorfindel.
It's like, what's he doing?
Yeah, they're like, this is supposed to be stealth,
Yeah. What they should have done is they should have had him go on a false mission and everybody would have been following
would have gone after him.
Meanwhile,
instead he just kind of sits in Rivendell and does nothing. But
exactly.
Well, maybe he'll show up. He could show up in Rings of Power. Like there's still.
He's supposed to show up in Middle Earth around the same time the wizards do. I don't think that character has been cast yet. But in terms of Arwen, I like her portrayal in the films. I like that they gave her something to do, in terms of introducing us to her. Because again, and that gave the opportunity for a little bit of banter with Aragorn so that we can quickly understand their relationship and what the stakes are here. And they build that more in those quiet moments in Rivendell when they're together, like when she tells him, "You are Isildur's heir, not Isildur himself," because Aragorn is worried. Do I have that? You know, I'm human, so is he. Do I have that, flaw of being tempted? I like that okay, she's not a Tariel like from the Hobbit movies, where if you know what I mean. She's not that. They don't
trying too hard.
Right, yeah. But she's still like, I felt that they struck a good balance with Arwen in the films for the most part. I do think that, and they introduced this element in the film, that kind of thing where like the growing darkness in Middle Earth is like killing her and she's slowly like ebbing away. It's in the Two Towers movie. Yeah, I think I felt that was kind of unnecessary, but it was another thing to like up the stakes. And if Aragorn and Frodo don't defeat Sauron, then Arwen will die. And I'm like, but we already have the stakes of all of Middle Earth being destroyed. Like, I get
everyone's gonna die.
I get that they wanted to make the stakes more immediate and personal for Aragorn, but I still think it was kind of unnecessary. But on the whole, I liked Arwen in this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of other changes, were there any? I have one to call out, but I'll see if you all have any other changes from the book to the movie that you want to bring up.
I you know what? Sorry, I just have to say,
go ahead.
I kind of wish, and although I know it couldn't have happened any other way because they didn't have Tom Bombadil and they didn't have the hobbits in the barrows, but the way Aragorn very quickly just had these daggers conveniently the size of for hobbits to use when they were like being chased by they were on Amon Hen?
Weathertop.
Yeah. Do you know what I call it? There's a place where I take the dogs and I call it Amon Hu, because Hu is the Quinian word for dog, so we just call it dog. So
yeah.
Like Amon Hu, I have no idea what it's actually called. So Amon Sul, and he like just has these daggers. I don't know. It was so cool the way they got them.
And then Galadriel gives them other daggers later in the movie, and I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense. But the Barrow daggers had a special significance. They were forged in
the First Age,
Numenor, I think.
I think so. Yeah, they mentioned.
I think they say in the books, I think Westerness specifically, which is
bound about with Numenor. Spells for the Bane of Mordor.
Yeah.
So that's why they're like it's one hit kill for like the Witch King when they
exactly.
Well, my headcanon, I could headcanon that by saying, well, Aragorn was meeting the hobbits at Gandalf's request, so he had supplies for them. So that's my
from a barrow.
Yeah,
sure. It's a headcanon. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just he's passing it. Yeah, he and Tom Bombadil went shopping one day in a barrow.
The movie is so good, we have to dig deep to come up with these problems.
Well, and speaking of, and before I kind of get to the big change the change I'm talking about is like the quotability of this movie is just amazing. Like
it's like a second language for me and my brother. We're always quoting this movie. Yeah,
because when I saw it, this was before memes were a thing when it first came out. But like my friends and I we would quote these things back and forth. But I mean, I'm a big craft beer guy, so like the scene in at the Prancing Pony is when Pippin's ordering. He's what is that? It's a pint. A pint. It comes in pints. I'm getting one.
Pints. I'm going for one. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that scene, it's always great. And then of course Pippin gets a little bit too deep in his pints and starts spreading talking out of school and telling everybody, oh, this is Frodo Baggins. I'm his first cousin twice removed, or whatever he
says.
Yeah. But what about the one where Gimli was
Pippin,
like? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I just love Merry and Pippin and their portrayal in this, because you see them like they're always partying. Like they're partying in the Green Dragon, and in the Shire they're partying at Bilbo's birthday party. And then they're partying, they're just always, and they're not going to have a good time in the Two Towers for a while.
But they party even then when they're with the Rohirrim. They're having that thing where they dance on the table. Yeah.
Well, isn't that in the, that's in Return of the King.
That's in Return of the King.
Yeah,
but when
exactly.
The Two Towers ends where they're in
Isengard.
Oh, Isengard. Yeah, that's right.
With Treebeard. But yeah, no, I love Aragorn is probably my favorite dramatic character in the films. His becoming the king is amazing. But Merry and Pippin are my favorite non-dramatic because they're so much fun. And I think I've said if I had to live anywhere in Middle Earth, I would probably pick the Shire and be able to just hang out at the pub and eat good food all the time. But I mean the quotability of the movie, it is a gift. One does not simply walk into Mordor,
which I actually saw parodied in another fantasy thing, and it was really funny.
Is it somebody I'm trying to think. I saw the quote, "No, one cannot simply walk into Mordor," and then it showed Frodo and Sam walking into Mordor.
Oh no, yeah,
isn't that one? Okay,
I saw something where the characters in this thing had to go somewhere, and they were like, "It turns out you can just simply walk there." Yeah, and I was like, okay. I'm like, that was funny. As if the characters had seen the Lord of the Rings, which they hadn't, which made it even funnier reference. But in any case, one thing I do like to nitpick on a little bit is that I wish Gimli wasn't played for laughs as much as he is in the movie. I like his book interpretation much better, where he's just this awesome dwarf character. Where I was going to say, I think he definitely tried to pick up on that really rough Scottish humor. Oh, okay. I mean,
if you
I love John Rhys Davies. I think he did a great job, but
and he did a good Scottish accent as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But I just feel like they played him for laughs just one too many times over the course of the trilogy. And I'm like,
well, yeah, nobody tosses a dwarf. Oh, right. Not the beard.
No. Yeah, although I laugh at the beard one, though. Legolas just reaches out and grabs him by the beard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love just, my favorite character from the book often rotates, and Gimli's on that rotation. I just like him,
Yeah.
I just think he's cool, and I love dwarven culture and stuff like that. One of my favorite moments from the Fellowship book is when he sings the Song of Durin, which I almost have completely memorized. I've been working on it so that I can memorize the Song of Durin, because it's a long poem. But yeah, I just love that whole where he's talking about what Moria used to be when it was Khazad-dûm in its glory, and you get these little hints of dwarven religion and their beliefs in the reincarnation of their leader, Durin, when he wakes again from sleep and all that stuff. And I
like the part in the book where he brings Frodo down, oh, come on, let's go look in the pool.
See the Mirror. Yeah. He's like, Frodo, I would not have you pass without seeing, this place that's sacred to him.
Yeah.
Essentially.
He's quite a romantic, Gimli is, I think.
He is.
In both. And I think John Rhys Jones did a really good job, especially with the gifts that Galadriel would give to everyone. Mm-hmm. And I loved how Cate Blanchett did such a good job where she giggled like a young girl again, and you think about how old Galadriel was, and not too many people are going to make her giggle like a young girl. And yet he did. And it was because of his real, he was just smitten with her, and there was everything in it was pure. His love for her was pure.
Right.
Yeah, that goes back to we previously recorded an episode on elf dwarven friendship, and we definitely talked about that it's Gimli, it wasn't, it's different than in the books in Silmarillion, Fëanor wanting her, he wanted to covet strands of her hair versus Gimli being very humble and asking. So and as we eventually talk about the other films, I mean, because you get a little bit of Gimli and Legolas in this movie, a little bit of that developing friendship, and there's a lot of we're skipping a lot of time, because in the books they're I forget exactly the timeline between when they leave Rivendell to the time they get to Moria, but they're going through Moria for like days, or even maybe even, is it weeks even, or is it just like several days?
I can't remember. I think, well, in the film, Gandalf says it's a 4 days journey.
Okay, yeah. But it seems like in the books it's even longer than that. But
yeah, I can't remember.
You just get the sense that there's like, you're missing a lot of like campfire scenes. And if this was, if Tolkien had written, you know, a 12 book series like Wheel of Time or something, there's a lot of scenes in the books Wheel of Time where people are like just traveling from one place to the other and like talking along the way. But we're obviously, you know, and I like those books. And, and I mean, but Tolkien wasn't going for that necessarily. But you just get the sense that they had these like, yeah, you just get the sense like they've kind of been hanging out at the camp by the campfire at night and or whatnot. But
that reminds me that this may be another reason why it's my favorite of the three films, is that I like having the Fellowship all together. Yeah, I like having them together as one group, and it's cool when they split off and we follow the different storylines. But for some reason, I just like having them all together. I like the idea of the Fellowship.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Yeah. And I think, I as well, because this is where they became friends. They became like family, you know, to one another. One of the things I was just going to say, when we're talking about the Mines of Moria, and we haven't even really said much about Gandalf, who's an amazing character.
Oh, Ian McKellen knocks it right out of the park.
Oh, yeah. I know. But
yeah, the casting overall was just like, I can't think of one film actor that I would replace.
And Christopher Lee as Saruman was an inspired choice, you know.
Yeah, and also when the film came out, I wasn't, from what I think helped really draw me into the Middle Earth yet again, was I wasn't familiar with a lot of the actors. Like, I couldn't picture them in other films. So they're forever that person. You know, Elrond, I mean, he was the only one that I had seen in a film, and that was Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. But he was so well.
He was, I think for me, he was Agent Smith.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's in the Matrix.
Okay. And see, now I'm like showing my age, but I think I'm probably old enough to be both of your aunties. but you know, because I hadn't seen, but he was so heavily disguised as Elrond, I didn't really recognize him. So the fact that all of these actors were sort of Antipodean actors was very helpful in drawing us into the world. And you can't picture Gandalf except as Sir Ian McKellen. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see if because now that the film rights are with another company now, it'll be interesting to see what they do, because they can't, like, you can't remake this film. You're not just going to like remake this. They have to do something different and interpret things, you know, differently. And hopefully that's, you know, I mean, I'll be there to see it. So
in only one case do I think they should remake it. And that is if it is completely 2D animated. Like if they do an anime interpretation, and I know we're getting War of the Rohirrim, but if we got an entire like Miyazaki style anime Lord of the Rings, that is the only like thing where I would say go for it.
Yeah,
I don't want to see it again in live action. I really don't.
See. Yeah. I mean, they're going to make it in live action because an anime film isn't going to make the budget that a film company, like, they're not going to make enough money. Whereas they think they could, like, we could probably milk this for a lot of money. So I bet it'll be live action now.
Yeah,
we'll see what they could do like they could do Glorfindel instead of Arwen. They could do Tom Bombadil. They could do
there
these
are
things
changes
that
they could make. Yeah, it's just that I don't trust them.
Well, I'm thinking, if you did do some kind of animation, I would want to see it done by Cartoon Saloon, which did, and they did Book of Kells and The Secret of, I can't remember what it is. But anyway, because they have a style, I think that would be more, would make more sense stylistically to Lord of the Rings than say anime. Yeah. I mean, you could do it, but I just think, they have a beautiful, beautiful style. But I don't know. What do I say? I'm a purist. I hate to admit it. I'm a purist.
I'll see it. I'll see it, if nothing else, for the sake of podcasting eventually.
Right? Yeah, we gotta have material.
It'll be a while, but yeah. I mean, these films are just so timeless, and as we're kind of getting toward the end, the change I was referring to, and the thing I wanted to bring up was, for me, Boromir's death scene might be one of my favorite scenes in the entire trilogy. Like the scene where because it's just after he was trying to take the ring from Frodo, and he's, after Frodo, puts the ring on and runs away, Boromir's like, he's kind of silly, but he like trips, and then he like brings his head up, and he's like disheveled with leaves in his hair, and he's like, Frodo, and he's like, what have I done? But then going in, he sees the Uruk-hai coming, because the Uruk-hai are coming to, they're on, Sauron is, I guess, created them. They don't really make it clear in the film how the Uruk-hai come to be. They're just kind of like, they're like breeding pits, or anyway. But yeah, his death scene where he's fighting off all these Uruk-hai while the, Merry and Pippin, who'd given Frodo time to get away, like they're all fighting the Uruk-hai, and Boromir has these he gets hit with 3 giant arrows, and like he's still fighting up until like the 3rd arrow, and then right as the Uruk-hai captain is about to just plant one in his chest, Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas show up, and unfortunately
just Aragorn
Boromir
at first, right?
He
fights
they're all but they all
the
get
big
there.
orc. They actually gave him a name, and I think it's in the subtitles. Lurtz.
Okay.
Yeah, and Lurtz he's in. I think he's in the Two Towers as well, like in the book.
Okay.
There's a character called Lurtz.
Is there? Because I think in the book the leader is Ugluk.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like the 2 guys that were the 2 orcs that were going through when Sam was following them through to go after Frodo. Sorry, we digress.
Oh no, don't worry.
We always do that on this show.
No, I was saying like he's dying basically in air, and he's confessing. And I read an article on Word on Fire, which I don't have it offhand, but someone is basically like talking about this as like a Catholic absolution of Boromir, because he's like confessing what he did, and he's and this is different in the books, because in the books he's just like, as he dies, is like, farewell Aragorn, save my people, and it's like he doesn't even consider Aragorn even one of his people. But in the film he says, he's like, the White Tower will fall, and our people will fail, and Aragorn says, I promise you, I will not see the White City fall. And Boromir says, I would have followed you, my leader, my captain, my king,
my brother, he calls,
or my brother. Yeah, that's what the other word, my brother, my captain, my king, and dies. And just, so at least for me, like it gives me chills every time. It's like, for me, that's one of the chill moments I get from these movies.
It's a beautiful moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
And then the costume thing I was going to, the last thing I was going to say is, I read recently that, and I never noticed this, but as toward the past that, when Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn are like, they're letting Frodo and Sam go, Aragorn is putting on Boromir's van braces. So he had taken them off of Boromir, and he's like, when he's like tying onto his wrist, he's putting on Boromir's van braces.
No way.
Which is like a cool way. Yeah. And I just saw that recently in an article, and I was like, because I'm not like, and it's a problem when I read and watch things. It's like I absorb the big stuff, but it's those little details that I'm like, I don't focus on. It's just not how my mind works. But just such a cool moment, such a cool detail. And
it is.
Luckily we get to see Boromir, at least in a flashback, later in the trilogy.
Yeah. But he was a hero, he died a hero. And as I was watching
that redemption.
He did. And do you know what it actually reminded me of? I told my husband last night, I said, this reminds me of Christ on the cross to the good thief, when he said, I will see you in heaven. And on this day, I will see you in heaven. And it was almost like Boromir I could imagine that scene. It's like the Boromir and Aragorn, that interaction would be like Christ and the good thief on the cross. Yeah. It was really beautiful.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, I like that Boromir gets that redemption, and that they add a little bit to it, because he's not a bad person. He's a fundamentally good person. He just had a moment of weakness.
And he was a desperate person. He was a desperate man who wanted to save what he loved, and that was Gondor, his culture. You know, he was willing to do anything, and that's what made him vulnerable to the ring.
Right. Yeah. I think one change from the books that I wanted to mention and to get your guys' thoughts on before we moved on is that they decided to interpret very literally the Eye of Sauron as a giant flaming eyeball on top of Barad-dûr, where I guess there's some justification in the book, but not a whole lot. The Eye of Sauron is meant as kind of like this symbol for the overpowering will of Sauron that is on you, especially when you've got the ring. But it's kind of, everyone makes fun of it and laughs at it. He was even in the Lego Batman movie when they have a bunch of cameos from other universes. Sauron shows up and he's a flaming Lego eyeball on top of the tower.
Yeah, I think it comes or is somewhat inspired by some of the illustrations of Tolkien himself. I don't know if there was a tour, gosh, I want to say now 4 or 5 years ago, of the collection at the Bodleian or Bodleian, however you want to say it, where it did make its rounds in the United States. I don't know if either one of you ever had a chance to see.
No, I may have seen like stuff online of it, but I didn't go.
Of Tolkien's illustrations, and they weren't just from Lord of the Rings or from Middle Earth, although a lot of it was. We actually went to the Bodleian to see it, and I think there's something there that would have probably justified how they did it.
Okay.
I think it makes sense to have, because if Sauron's the ultimate villain of the films, like he's got to be represented somehow. He's as a film, as a book, it makes sense. Doesn't have to be. You don't have to see him to know.
Yeah, he's a disembodied spirit in the books.
But in the it makes films you to have like a visual representation of that, and you actually hear in this film and others Sauron talking to people, like he's talking to Saruman through the Palantir, and he does the same in Return of the King. He sees Aragorn, picks up the Palantir, and Sauron's talking to him there. So you actually get to see like Sauron's in after having him seen his physical form in the when Galadriel's narrating The Last Alliance, you see Sauron physically, but then you get to see like I don't know. To me, it made sense, and I mean, I as I've read the books, Sauron's an eye is like and it's just I think of it as like it's his spirit. It can be whatever. It's just it's a spirit. He's just showing himself as an eye, which would probably terrify the orcs and terrify his subjects already, because they know there's a giant flaming eyeball, because Sauron rules through fear. He doesn't rule through
exactly.
So I think it makes sense. And
and there is an implacableness about it, that it's just like this giant eye that never sleeps, and that I've heard like some theorizing that like that's not his true shape at this point in the movies, but that like he's manifesting a sort of ethereal projection of this eye, but that he's really inside the tower is like where his main like spirit form like body is.
I think it's hard. How do you depict a spirit or something, this evil spirit? And I know that towards the end of this is of course going on to another film, but in Return of the King, where they have that battle to kind of distract him, and this big cave troll comes out and it's going after Aragorn, and everyone's like, oh my gosh. And he's stepping. Well, I think originally that was supposed to be Sauron, which explains why they have the facial expressions they have. So that troll.
Oh, yeah.
And so they had it. So it was originally supposed to be the embodiment of Sauron. But then there was a little bit of like, wait a minute, Sauron is still supposed to be a spirit, and how is this going to happen? They're not going to kill that thing. And so then they switched it from Sauron to this cave troll. But when you watch it and you kind of like, let's imagine that was Sauron coming out.
That's
like, could you imagine? That would have been
almost like
so insane.
A redo of the battle between Elendil and Sauron.
Yeah.
Like
I'm going to headcanon now that Sauron is possessing that cave troll for that battle. So that's headcanon for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it would have been. Do you know it would have been really cool if like that troll just had just a lidless eye,
Oh,
A
yeah.
lidless eye, or like
not a googly eye, but
like
you know, it have to be like a flame
cyclops,
and read
like a cyclops
eye.
or something. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
but it
too
was like
that
Sauron's
the
eye.
imagery of this all-seeing eye on top of this tower, it's very much like is the modus operandi of Sauron as kind of a satanic figure, because he's taking something that is used as imagery of the divine in other contexts and perverting it. I mean, if you turn an American dollar bill over, you'll see the all-seeing eye of Providence on top of a tower as part of the imagery of the Great Seal of the United States. It is a pyramidal tower with a giant luminous eye, and it's supposed to represent the all-seeing eye of divine providence. And of course, and so Sauron is like perverting that. He's like, oh, I can be this all-seeing eye on top of a tower. It's like, you know, taking that imagery and just perverting it and twisting it. Because as we know from like the Silmarillion, and I think they mentioned this in the Lord of the Rings, Morgoth and Sauron are not creative. They don't create anything of their own. They just take things that already exist and twist them and mock them. Yeah. So I think it's very interesting, quasi blasphemous imagery, but that's the point. He's Sauron. He's a dark spirit. His whole point is like, I want to take God's place, essentially. All his armies worship him as a god. So
yeah, and everything he has is a mockery of something that Eru Ilúvatar has made.
Yeah, like in the trolls, they're like a mockery of Ents. They're like so.
And the Uruk-hai are probably a mockery of the elves, and the goblins and the orcs are mockeries of men.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, unless anyone has anything else, the last kind of note our last couple notes, one thing we didn't talk about at all when we did a whole episode on him was Gollum, and like this portrayal of Gollum it's like, this is always going to be Gollum. Like we did the Hobbit movie, we did the animated Hobbit, and that's a very different interpretation of Gollum, but like I'm always going to think of Andy Serkis as Gollum in this film and in, you know, the Hobbit films. But there's, you know, at some point we did the Born of Hope as a prequel, and at some point I want to do there's that Hunt for Gollum short film.
The fan film,
because Aragorn found Gollum, but he had already been captured by you know, Mordor had released him at that point. But yeah, I don't know if any of y'all, when we talked a lot about Gollum, and I don't know if any of y'all have anything to say about that, about him in the film, but
we don't see much of him in this film.
No, we just kind of see his, you know, blinking in the dark.
It's more of the Two Towers discussion, but
he's an amazing character.
They all kind of run together for me. It's
like how many times in this discussion have I said something is Two Towers, but it's really Return of the King? You know,
like I'm gonna have to go watch Two Towers, even though it might be a little bit before we get to them, but I'm gonna have to go watch Two Towers and Return of the King in the near future just to kind of complete because I do kind of consider them all like, I mean, in Tolkien himself, it was books, you know, 1 and 2, 2 and 3, and 4, or 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6. So it was all like, it was the Lord of the Rings was a, you know, and he obviously broke it up, but it's like, you know, it's one continuous story. But
and I mean, has anybody ever just done a Middle Earth marathon starting with The Hobbit and then going all the way through?
All extended editions too.
Yeah, I've wanted to do like
yes, I made my family. Well, actually, I didn't make because we were all willing to do it, but it was over one Christmas holiday break. We started with The Hobbit and all extended versions, and we just for what is it, 12 nights.
Yeah.
Like, come on, we're going to watch it again.
Yeah, I've wanted to do, I don't think I've done the movies in the same day, but I've done them before. And like, I'll do like one a day, like when I've had paternity leave or stuff and have a lot of time, like I'll turn them on, I'll do that. But yeah, it's hard nowadays to sit, like I had to watch this in about 3 settings just cause, you know, it's hard to find the time to, without falling asleep at the end of the night, I guess when I'm watching. So, but yeah, and unfortunately we're not doing the 9-hour version of this where every time Sam takes a step further from the Shire, it cuts back to the scene of, this is the furthest I've ever been away from the Shire. Someone on YouTube like made that into a video where it's like they cut out that scene and inserted every step Sam takes in the film.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
that's
it's like
insane.
Yeah,
Oh my
it's like
God.
9 hours long.
You posted that on our Slack channel, and I had no clue what you were talking about.
Oh yeah.
I was like, what?
And then I watched a video of someone who actually did it, and he said it was like 9 hours, and he was like, you almost have to go into like, you know, a detached consciousness state because there are parts of the movie that are just like he's literally taking a step and you know, insert that quote. But, yeah, people have had but the last thing I had on here before we kind of wrap up, because I know we're kind of getting to time, is the films is kind of a cultural phenomenon, because this is like, for me, I may have read them eventually, but if without the films, I probably wouldn't have read the books that soon. But like, I know a lot of my friends who have never read a word of Tolkien, they're familiar with it from these films, and you know, they can, even if they've never read the books, they can kind of get into the world through them. And for me, it was like a gateway, because like now every time I'm like, as we've done the podcast, I'll start looking up one thing in Tolkien lore, and then I'll start looking, and it leads me like an hour later, I've spent on a rabbit hole looking up lore and stuff. So yeah, it's a cultural phenomenon that like captured the minds of, and I think it kind of kicked off this high fantasy adaptation world, because now like,
yeah,
because now like, you know, we have Game of Thrones, and Wheel of Time is you know, fresh off and just a ton of these are, it's like everyone now is trying to make a version of this, you know, and I mean, there are good stories out there that they can do. But it's like, I feel like at least Peter Jackson he wanted to like bring this to like, he was a visionary. It wasn't just like, oh, this will make money. It was like, he had the vision of wanting to bring this story to life as like an artist. So I don't know if y'all have any thoughts on just kind of the cultural phenomenon of this. And like, we've talked about the memes, and you know, there'll more to come as we eventually do the other films. But I don't know if y'all had any final thoughts on that or anything else for the film before we close out.
I have to say I'm a bit torn, because I know, I'm glad it's a cultural phenomenon. I'm glad that someone interpreted Tolkien so beautifully. But the other side of it is that there's a certain degree of commercialization that I'm really not comfortable with, only because I know how Tolkien felt about excessive. Yes, exactly. Stuff like that.
People listening can't see, but I have my Gandalf on Gwaihir Funko Pop, and it's really the only like Lord of the Rings like merch thing I have, but it was a gift from my brother, and I keep it on my desk.
There you go. But I was going to say, and if you flip it over on the bottom, it probably says "Made in Mordor."
Actually, it doesn't say anything. There's no made of stamp on here.
There you go. They came out of the rocks or whatever, sprang out of the rocks. But yeah, I think it's that commercial element of it that I'm a little uncomfortable with. And as I said, I am a purist, so I think that has something to do with it. I just want to keep it just as nice. It's like there's a difference between my husband and I just wandered into an antique shop the other day, and they have stuff from the 1600s in there. And if you look at something from the 1600s, like a table or a chest of drawers, and then you like look at IKEA, like there's no comparison. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is it gets the further it gets from Tolkien and what he wanted this world to be, the less authentic it feels to me. That's all.
Yeah, and I think that's what the Hobbit movies kind of, we've joked, and there's good in the Hobbit movies. I think the first one is probably the best, because it's I would say the most faithful out of the the three.
I like the first one.
But I think part of it was like, I think Peter Jackson, he wanted to do the Hobbit, and I think the studio's like, you made 3 Lord of the Rings movies, let's make 3 Hobbit movies to make money. And so there's probably, a compromise that he had. If he wanted to do the Hobbit, he had to do he had to make it 3 movies.
It was definitely like butter spread across too much bread.
Much bread.
There you go.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't I make 3 movies?
I think that's a meme too. Like,
after all, why not? Why shouldn't I?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, maybe we'll have to do a show at some point with you, Alex, on your opinions on Rings of Power. But I know Thomas and I were, I think we were relatively.
Really want to do that?
Well, that's why we started.
Because it's good to get different perspectives. Because the panel on the show, we were pretty surprised and generally positive about it. So it's good not to live in an echo chamber, and it's good to have different perspectives. And I know a lot of people were not satisfied with the Rings of Power.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. Yeah, the films like the Lord of the Rings trilogy will be my, probably my favorite. Will probably always be my favorite adaptation of Tolkien. No matter what happens with, future things. But
yeah. But yeah, I agree with you. Thoughts? Yeah, I was just going to agree with Alex that the amount of commercialization has been a bit disappointing, especially in the realm of some of the video games. And I'm not a huge gamer myself, but I keep abreast of the news in that sphere. Speaking of, there is one, sorry to interrupt and digress, but there is a Shire game coming out at some point. Is it a farming sim? It better be like Stardew Valley or something.
I don't know much about it, but I did see it seems like it has a lot of good buzz. It's like,
oh, okay.
It seems like a simple kind of farming sim of the Shire.
I would love that. But anyway, like the Shadow of Mordor games, especially the second one with the loot boxes, it was such a naked cash grab. And the fact that the premium loot boxes were called Mithril loot boxes. I'm like, this is from hell. I'm like,
Mordor. It's from Mordor.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's from Udun. Tolkien is like he would be tearing his hair out to know that Mithril is being used. Oh, this is the premium loot box where it's basically gambling. It's like this randomized thing, and you got to pay real money for it. And I'm like, this is like really skeevy, and I don't like it. But I do. So I understand that they are moving in some directions where the commercialization, all you think of just what Thorin says in The Hobbit. If the world cared less about hoarded gold, it would be a lot merrier. But I do like the cultural phenomenon, how it's been a cultural phenomenon. Because when I was in college, I knew a lot of people who were huge fans of the films and got exposed to the books that way. And many of my friends, because I was in the sciences, many of my friends were either agnostic or atheist. And it was a way that I could start discussions with them and say, well, Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and he put all of this deeply Catholic imagery into the Lord of the Rings. And they'd be like, what? Really? And then I'd have a chance, as a conversation starter, to plant a seed there. And so I think that there's definitely, especially among the younger generations, us kind of nerd geek community, it's a way to kind of, I'm glad that more people are exposed to it. I am concerned about, the future directions. And while I liked the first season of Rings of Power, there's always the possibility it could get much worse. And so I am concerned about that. But I think on the whole, I'm glad that we got this film trilogy being largely faithful to the books and exposing so many people to it. I know that in America, Tolkien popularity has kind of been in waves. Like, apparently with the Woodstock crowd, it was very popular, I've heard.
And Leonard Nimoy.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Well, there's the pipeweed aspect of...
Oh, there's that. Yeah. I saw on YouTube once, there was this video explaining how pipeweed is totally not the weed you think. And it got so many downvotes of people who were just angry. They're like, no, it is weed. And it's like, oh, it's just tobacco, guys.
Yeah,
I know.
Whatever.
You can't walk as far as they did and do everything they did if you're smoking a doobie. I'm sorry.
Anyway,
there's the meme of Gandalf Saruman saying, the love of the halfling's pipeweed has clouded your mind, and then you see the picture of Gandalf saying, well, that's just like your opinion, man. Yeah, it's just so many memes.
Goodness.
These things are such not quite as memeable as the Star Wars prequels, but still up there.
Good.
But
Yeah.
Well, I think unless anyone has anything else, I think that'll do it for this
Before
time.
we go completely off the rails.
I know.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just thinking, I'm looking at the time. I still have to make dinner.
Yeah.
Dinner, supper.
Oh, yeah.
11ses. It's going to be 11ses if I don't go
Breakfast,
Yeah.
afternoon tea. Exactly. Well, in that case, that's it for this episode of The Secrets of Middle-earth. We'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make this show possible, including Naomi S., Dan H., Renee S., Syntex S., and James C. Their generous donations help us to continue to create The Secrets of Middle-earth and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them at sqpn.com/give. Now, we'd love to hear from you, our listeners. What do you think about Peter Jackson's Fellowship of the Ring? And as we look forward to recording more Secrets of Middle-earth episodes in 2024, we wanted to ask you, our listeners, what topics you would like to hear us discuss. Please send your ideas to our Facebook page or on Twitter, or by sending an email to middleearth@sqpn.com, by leaving us a comment on YouTube, or by visiting our channel on the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. We're having a lot of fun over there. It's like a messenger type of service you can have conversations about, and really enjoyable. Join us in upcoming episodes where we'll be discussing the sequels to this film and other topics of Middle-earth. And though I have known them half as well as I should like, Alix Murray, thank you for joining me in discussing the secrets of Middle-earth.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
And Thomas Salerno, thank you as well.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
And once again, I'm Jeff Haecker. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Middle-earth on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy, The Secrets of Middle-earth. Find it wherever you can find podcasts or at sqpn.com/Middle-earth.